The studio lights burned bright, casting a warm glow over the set of the Kelly Clarkson Show. The audience buzzed with anticipation, their energy palpable as they waited for the next guest. Kelly Clarkson, all smiles and Texas charm, leaned forward. In her chair, her hands clasped tightly as she introduced the one and only Jennifer Lopez. The crowd erupted into applause, a wave of cheers rolling through the room as Jennifer stepped onto the stage. Her presence was electric, her sequined dress catching the light with every confident stride. She waved, flashed that megawatt smile, and settled into the guest chair, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp, like she was ready for anything. Kelly wasted no time diving in, her voice warm but probing. She started with the usual pleasantries, asking about Jennifer's latest projects, her music, her films. The conversation flowed easily at first, Jennifer's answers polished but genuine, her laugh filling the air as she shared a story about a late-night rehearsal gone hilariously wrong. The audience ate it up, hanging on her every word. But there was something in the air, a subtle tension that only those paying close attention might notice. Kelly's questions began to shift, moving from lighthearted to pointed. She brought up Jennifer's recent public appearances, her high-profile relationships, the constant scrutiny she faced. Jennifer's smile tightened just a fraction, but she answered with grace, deflecting with a joke or a quick change of subject. Then Kelly leaned in, her tone still friendly, but with an edge that hadn't been there before. She asked about the rumors swirling around Jennifer's latest business venture, a wellness brand that had sparked controversy online. Some called it tone-deaf, a cash grab aimed at fans who couldn't afford the products. Jennifer's eyes narrowed slightly, but she kept her composure, explaining that her brand was about empowering people, not exploiting them. The audience clapped, but Kelly didn't let it go. She pressed harder, citing a few critical tweets she'd seen, asking if Jennifer felt out of touch with her fanbase. The question landed like a stone, and for a moment, the air seemed to thicken. Jennifer shifted in her seat, her fingers brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, a small gesture that betrayed her discomfort. The conversation took a sharper turn when Kelly brought up Jennifer's personal life, something about the pressures of balancing fame, family, and her relentless ambition. It was a question most hosts would have tiptoed around, but Kelly went straight for it, her voice carrying a mix of curiosity and challenge. Jennifer's response was measured, her words careful but laced with an undercurrent of defiance. Talked about the sacrifices she'd made, the choices that came with being in the spotlight for decades. The audience was quiet now, sensing the shift. Kelly nodded, but her next question was like a spark hitting dry grass. She asked if Jennifer ever felt like the world expected her to be perfect, and if that pressure had ever pushed her to make decisions she regretted. It was the kind of question that sounded empathetic but carried a sting, implying something deeper, something personal. Jennifer paused, her lips parting as if she were about to answer, then stopped. Her eyes locked onto Kelly's, and for the first time, the warmth in them faded. The audience held its breath, the silence stretching just a beat too long. Jennifer leaned forward, her voice low but steady. She said she didn't believe in regrets, only lessons, but the way she said it felt like a warning. Kelly smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She tried to pivot, tossing out a lighter question about Jennifer's upcoming tour, but the damage was done. The energy on the set had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Jennifer's answers grew shorter, her smile more forced. The audience clapped on cue, but their enthusiasm felt hollow, like they were waiting for something to happen. As the segment neared its commercial break, Kelly made one last attempt to keep things light, asking Jennifer to share a fun behind-the-scenes story from her latest movie. But Jennifer wasn't playing along anymore. She leaned back, her arms crossed, and said she'd rather talk about something real, something that mattered. The audience murmured, caught off guard. Kelly's laugh was quick, a little too sharp, as she tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground. But Jennifer wasn't having it. She stood up, her movements deliberate, and said she needed a moment. The crowd gasped as she walked off the set, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Kelly called after her, her voice a mix of surprise and apology, but Jennifer didn't turn back. The stage manager scrambled, signaling for a break, and the screens faded to commercials as the audience sat stunned, whispering among themselves. Backstage, the air was thick with tension. Jennifer Lopez moved swiftly through the narrow corridor, her heels echoing against the concrete floor. Her team trailed behind, a flurry of hushed voices and quick steps, but she didn't slow down. Her face was a mask of controlled fury, her jaw set, her eyes fixed straight ahead. A production assistant, clipboard in hand, hesitated to approach, sensing the storm brewing. Jennifer reached her dressing room, pushed the door open, and let it swing shut behind her, leaving her team exchanging uneasy glances outside. Inside, she leaned against the vanity, her hands gripping the edge as she stared into the mirror. Her reflection stared back, a woman who'd faced countless battles in the spotlight. But this one felt different. Rawer, like a nerve had been struck. On the set, Kelly Clarkson sat frozen for a moment, her smile gone, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The audience's murmurs grew louder, a mix of shock and curiosity rippling through the crowd. The stage manager's voice crackled through the crew's headsets, urging them to keep things moving. Kelly snapped back to herself, forcing a laugh as she addressed the audience, her voice a touch too bright. She said something about live TV being unpredictable, promised they'd be right back, and waved as the cameras panned away. But her eyes darted toward the wings, where Jennifer had disappeared, and for a split second, her composure faltered. The crew hustled, resetting the stage for the next segment, but the energy in the room felt off, like everyone was holding their breath. In the control room, producers were in a frenzy. The executive producer, a seasoned veteran with a knack for handling crises, barked orders to pull up the footage of the interview. They needed to know exactly what went wrong, what sparked Jennifer's exit. The monitors replayed the moment. Kelly's probing questions, Jennifer's tightening smile, the final exchange before she stood up. The producer leaned closer, muttering about damage control. They debated whether to cut the segment entirely or spin it as a dramatic moment for ratings, but they all knew the internet was already lighting up, fans and critics alike, dissecting every word, every glance. Social media was a ticking clock, and they had to act fast. Back in the dressing room, Jennifer's phone buzzed relentlessly on the counter, messages from her publicist, her manager, her friends. She ignored them, pacing now, her thoughts racing. She'd been in tougher spots before, faced harsher questions, but something about Kelly's tone, the way she'd pressed on those personal wounds, felt like a betrayal. They'd known each other for years, shared stages, swapped stories. This wasn't just an interview, it was a public challenge, a test of her resilience disguised as banter. Jennifer stopped pacing, her eyes catching a framed photo on the wall, a shot of her performing, sweat-soaked and fearless. She took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. She wasn't done here, not yet. Meanwhile, Kelly was pulled aside by a producer during the break. They stood in a quiet corner of the set, away from the crew's prying eyes. The producer's voice was low, urgent, asking what happened, why she'd pushed so hard. Kelly's face softened, a flicker of regret crossing her features. She said she hadn't meant to cross a line, that she thought they were just being real, to women who could handle a tough conversation. But even as she spoke, her words sounded hollow, like she was trying to convince herself. The producer nodded, but their expression was grim. They told her to prep for the next segment, to keep it light, but Kelly's mind was elsewhere. Replaying the moment Jennifer walked away, the audience, still buzzing, was ushered into a brief intermission, with music playing to fill the awkward silence. Some pulled out their phones, already posting about the drama, their fingers flying across screens. Others whispered theories, wondering if it was staged, if Jennifer and Kelly had planned this for attention. But those closest to the stage, who'd seen the look in Jennifer's eyes, knew it was real. The tension hadn't been scripted, and neither had her exit. As the crew counted down to the end of the break, a decision loomed. Would Jennifer return to the stage, or was this the end of the interview? The answer hung in the air, heavy and uncertain, as the cameras prepared to roll. Again, the studio lights flared back on, and the audience's murmurs hushed as the stage manager signaled the end of the break. Kelly Clarkson retook her seat, her smile practiced but strained, like she was bracing for impact. The cameras rolled, and she launched into a quick monologue, her voice carrying that familiar warmth, though it felt forced now. She made a vague reference to technical difficulties, a weak attempt to gloss over the drama, and pivoted to introducing the next segment, a cooking demo with a celebrity chef. The audience clapped on cue, but their energy was scattered, their eyes darting to the wings as if expecting Jennifer Lopez to reappear. She didn't. The empty guest chair sat like a silent accusation, a reminder of the storm that had just swept through. Backstage, Jennifer stood in her dressing room, her team, now inside, their voices overlapping in a chaotic hum. Her publicist, a sharp woman with a knack for crisis management, urged her to go back out, to smooth things over with a smile and a quip. The optics, she said, were already spiraling. Social media was exploding with clips of the walk-off, and fans were picking sides. Jennifer listened, her expression unreadable, as she scrolled through her phone, skimming the flood of notifications. Posts were pouring in, some defending her, calling Kelly's questions unfair, others accusing her of overreacting, of dodging accountability. She set the phone down, her movements deliberate, and told her team she needed a minute alone. The team hesitated but filed out, leaving her in the quiet. The distant hum of the studio seeping through the walls. In the control room, the producers were split. One argued for cutting to a pre-recorded segment, pretending the interview never happened. But the executive producer shot it down. The moment was already viral, and burying it would only fuel speculation. They needed Jennifer back on stage, or at least a statement, something to control the narrative. A junior producer suggested reaching out to her team, but the response was curt. She wasn't ready to talk. The clock was ticking. The show had to go on, but the weight of the confrontation hung over everything. They decided to push through with the cooking segment. hoping Kelly's charm could salvage the episode, but the tension was palpable. Even through the monitors. On set, Kelly bantered with the chef, tossing out jokes about her own kitchen disasters. But her usual spark was dimmed. Her eyes flicked to the side, toward the empty chair, and for a moment, her smile faltered. The audience noticed, their applause less enthusiastic. Their attention split between the stage and their phones, where the drama was unfolding in real time. The chef, oblivious to the undercurrent, plated a dish and offered Kelly a taste. But her laugh sounded hollow, her mind clearly elsewhere. Offstage, a crew member whispered to another, wondering if Jennifer was still in the building or if she'd left entirely. Rumors were already spreading. Someone claimed they'd seen her team heading for the exit. In her dressing room, Jennifer sat on the couch. Her hands folded in her lap, her thoughts racing. She wasn't new to controversy. She'd weathered storms of criticism before, but this felt personal, like Kelly had crossed an invisible line. She replayed the interview in her mind, the way Kelly's questions had shifted from curious to confrontational. Probing wounds she'd worked hard to heal. She thought about going back out, facing the cameras, playing the role of the unshakable star. But something in her resisted, a quiet voice insisting she didn't owe anyone an explanation, not this time. She stood, smoothing her dress, and glanced at the door. Her team was waiting. The show was waiting. The world was waiting. But for what? An apology? A performance? She wasn't sure. As the cooking segment wrapped, Kelly thanked the chef with her usual warmth, but her eyes were tired. The audience clapped, but the energy in the room was fractured, the earlier drama still lingering. The stage manager signaled another break, and Kelly slipped off stage, her shoulders slumping slightly as she headed for her own dressing room. She passed a crew member who avoided her gaze, and for the first time, she felt the weight of what had happened. The show wasn't over, but the question loomed larger now. Would Jennifer return, or had the confrontation ended something bigger than just the interview? Kelly Clarkson pushed through the backstage door to her dressing room, the din of the studio fading behind her. She dropped into a chair, her hands rubbing her temples as if she could massage away the tension. Her assistant hovered nearby, offering a bottle of water, but Kelly waved it off. She stared at the monitor on the wall, showing the audience milling about during the break, their faces a mix of confusion and excitement. She knew they were talking about Jennifer, about the walk-off, about her. The weight of it pressed against her chest, a mix of guilt and frustration. She hadn't meant to push that hard, but the questions had felt honest in the moment, real now. They felt like a mistake she couldn't undo. Outside, the corridor buzzed with activity. Crew members darted past, their headsets crackling with updates. Jennifer's team was still in her dressing room, and word was she hadn't left the building. The executive producer cornered Kelly's manager, pressing for a plan. They needed to know if Kelly would address the incident on air or let it fade into the next segment. The manager glanced at Kelly through the open door, her expression unreadable, and promised to get back to them. But Kelly wasn't ready to decide. She kept replaying the interview. The moment Jennifer's eyes had gone cold, the way she'd stood and walked away. It wasn't just the questions, Kelly realized. It was the unspoken challenge between them. Two women who'd climbed the same brutal ladder, now pitted against each other in a way neither had expected. In Jennifer's dressing room, the silence was heavy. She stood by the window, looking out at the studio lot, her arms crossed tightly. Her publicist had slipped back in, urging her to consider returning to the stage, framing it as a chance to take control of the narrative. But Jennifer shook her head, her voice quiet but firm. She wasn't going back out there to play nice, not after Kelly had dug into her like that. She thought about their history, the times they'd crossed paths at events, shared laughs, even texted about the grind of the industry. That familiarity had made the question sting more, like a friend turning a private struggle into public fodder. Her phone buzzed again, a message from a close friend asking if she was okay. She didn't reply, but the question grounded her, reminding her who she was outside this moment. The control room was a pressure cooker. The producers watched the clock, the next segment looming. Social media was a wildfire now, with clips of the confrontation racking up millions of views. Hashtags were trending, some praising Jennifer for standing her ground, others slamming her for storming off. Kelly's name was tangled in it too, with fans debating whether she'd been too harsh or just doing her job. The executive producer made a call. They'd move forward with a musical guest, but they needed Kelly to intro it with her usual energy. They sent a runner to her dressing room with the cue sheet, but the air was thick with uncertainty. Would Jennifer's absence dominate the rest of the show, or could they salvage it? Back on set, the audience settled as the break ended. The stage manager counted down, and the cameras rolled. Kelly reappeared, her smile brighter than before, but her eyes carried a shadow. She introduced the musical guest, a rising pop star, with a quick joke that landed flat. The audience clapped, but their attention was elsewhere, their phones lighting up with updates. Some had caught sight of Jennifer's team moving through the backstage area, fueling whispers that she might still be in the building. The musical performance began, the singer's voice filling the studio. but it couldn't drown out the undercurrent of drama. Crew members exchanged glances, wondering if Jennifer would make a surprise return or if she was already gone. In her dressing room, Jennifer made a decision. She grabbed her purse, her movements swift and purposeful, and opened the door. Her team snapped to attention, ready to follow, but she held up a hand, signaling them to stay. She wasn't running, but she wasn't performing either. She stepped into the corridor, her heels clicking with intent, heading not for the stage, but for the exit. The studio's hum faded behind her, and the weight of her choice settled in. Whatever happened next, it would be on her terms, not the show's. Jennifer Lopez pushed through the studio's back door, the cool air of the lot hitting her like a wake-up call. The hum of the show faded behind her, replaced by the distant sound of traffic and the crunch of gravel under her heels. Her car waited nearby, the driver standing ready, but she paused, her hand on the door handle, her breath steady but heavy. She wasn't fleeing, she told herself. She was choosing to leave, to reclaim control after a moment that had spiraled beyond her grasp, but the sting of Kelly's questions lingered, sharp and personal, and the weight of the world watching pressed against her. She slid into the car, the door closing with a soft thud, and as it pulled away, she glanced back at the studio, its lights glowing like a stage she'd left unfinished. Inside, the musical guest's performance wrapped, the audience's applause. Polite but distracted, Kelly Clarkson stood offstage, watching the monitors, her arms crossed tightly. She'd pushed through the intro, kept her voice steady, but the effort was draining. The stage manager signaled the next segment, a light game with audience members, but Kelly's heart wasn't in it. She caught a producer's eye, a silent question passing between them. Any word from Jennifer? The producer shook their head, and Kelly nodded, her jaw tightening. She stepped back onto the set, her smile snapping into place like a reflex, but the audience could sense her unease. They played along, laughing at her jokes, but their phones were still buzzing. The drama outside the studio walls louder than the game unfolding in front of them. The control room was a storm of activity. The executive producer fielded calls from network execs, their voices tense as they demanded updates. The show was trending worldwide, but not for the reasons they'd hoped. Clips of Jennifer's walk-off were dissected online, with fans and critics spinning narratives, some calling it a power move, others a meltdown. The producers debated sending a team to intercept Jennifer, to convince her to return for a final segment, but her team's last message had been clear. She was done. They pivoted to damage control, crafting a statement for Kelly to read at the show's close. Something vague about respecting Jennifer's space and wishing her well, but it felt hollow, a bandage on a wound still bleeding. Backstage, Kelly's assistant slipped her a phone, showing the latest posts flooding social media. The hashtags were relentless, some defending Kelly's raw honesty, others accusing her of ambushing a guest. She scrolled through a few, her stomach twisting at the vitriol aimed at both her and Jennifer. She handed the phone back, her voice quiet, asking for a moment alone before the next segment. In her dressing room, she sank onto the couch, her hands covering her face. She'd wanted a real conversation, not a scripted fluff piece, but she hadn't expected this, the way it had unraveled into something bigger, something neither of them could control. She thought about reaching out to Jennifer, a text, a call, but what could she say? The moment felt too raw, too public now. Outside, Jennifer's car merged into city traffic, the studio fading into the distance. Her phone vibrated, her publicist, texting about a statement, a way to frame the walk-off as a stand for authenticity. Jennifer didn't respond. She leaned back, closing her eyes, letting the city's rhythm ground her. She knew the fallout would be brutal, the headlines, the think pieces, the memes, but she also knew her truth, the years of scrutiny she'd endured, the strength it took to keep going. She wasn't sorry for leaving, but she wasn't at peace either. The confrontation had exposed something, a fracture in the polished facade she'd built, and she wasn't sure what came next. On set, Kelly wrapped the game segment, her energy fading as the show neared its end. The audience clapped, but their minds were elsewhere, the earlier drama overshadowing everything. As the cameras cut to a final break, Kelly lingered on stage, her eyes scanning the crowd, searching for something she couldn't name. The show had to end, but the story didn't, not with Jennifer gone and the world watching, waiting for what either woman would do next. The studio lights dimmed as the Kelly Clarkson Show neared its close. Kelly Clarkson stood center stage, her hands clasped in front of her, the audience quieter now, their earlier excitement dulled by the weight of the day's events. The cameras rolled for the final segment, and Kelly's voice was steady but softer, lacking its usual spark. She thanked the audience, the guests, the crew, her words practiced but genuine. Then she paused, her eyes flickering with something unspoken. She addressed the elephant in the room, not by name but with a vague nod to the unpredictability of live TV, saying sometimes conversations get real, and that's what makes them human. The audience clapped, but it was subdued, like they knew the words were meant to cover a wound still open. Kelly signed off with her signature smile, but as the credits rolled, She walked off stage without looking back, her shoulders carrying a tension that hadn't been there before. In the control room, the producers exhaled, the show finally over. The executive producer leaned back, already fielding calls from the network, their tone a mix of relief and frustration. The episode was a ratings juggernaut, but at what cost? Social media was a battlefield, with fans of both women drawing lines, turning a single interview into a referendum on fame, authenticity, and power. The team drafted a press release, a neutral statement about valuing both Kelly and Jennifer, but it felt like a drop in the ocean. The story had taken on a life of its own, and no carefully worded paragraph could contain it. They turned off the monitors, the screens going dark. But the fallout was just beginning. Jennifer Lopez's car pulled into her hotel's underground garage, the city's lights a blur outside the tinted windows. She stepped out, her movements deliberate, ignoring the paparazzi lingering near the entrance. Inside her suite, she kicked off her heels and sank onto the couch. The silence, a stark contrast to the studio's chaos. Her phone was a minefield of notifications. But she opened a single message from her sister, a simple check-in that made her exhale. She didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she poured a glass of water, her mind replaying the confrontation. Not just Kelly's questions, but the years of scrutiny they'd unearthed. She wasn't naive. She knew the walk-off would define her for weeks, maybe longer. But she also knew it was a moment of truth, a refusal to perform when the cost felt too high. She stood by the window, the city sprawling below, and felt a quiet resolve settle in. Kelly, back in her dressing room, packed her things in silence. Her team bustled around her, planning the next day's show, but she was only half listening. She thought about Jennifer, about the look in her eyes before she walked away, a mix of hurt and defiance Kelly hadn't anticipated. She wanted to reach out, to clear the air, but the moment felt too big now, swallowed by the public's gaze. She slung her bag over her shoulder and left the studio, the night air cool against her skin. The drive home was quiet, her thoughts tangled in what she'd say if she ever got the chance to make things right, and whether that chance would ever come. The world didn't stop turning. By morning, the confrontation was headline news, dissected on talk shows, analyzed in podcasts, memed across platforms. Some praised Jennifer for standing her ground, others called it unprofessional. Kelly's supporters lauded her honesty, while critics accused her of overstepping. But beyond the noise, the story was simpler. Two women navigating a world that demanded perfection. Their vulnerabilities laid bare in a moment neither could take back. The studio would host new guests, new segments, but the echo of that day lingered. A reminder of the cost of being real in a spotlight that never dims. And somewhere, in their separate corners of the world, Jennifer and Kelly carried on, each grappling with the fallout in their own way. The cameras weren't rolling anymore, but the story wasn't over. Not for them. Not for the millions still watching, waiting for what came next.